Can any one of the doctors just call Dr. Suren if you don't mind? Because if I have to call sir only on WhatsApp. So may I request any one of the doctors or nurses who can call Dr. Suren and just remind him for the session. I have already did over email to him, but it will be nice if you can help me.
Tashika Krishnasamy. Hello. Tashika. From where did you get this image? Did you draw it?
I am just Google it, ma'am.
I see. I thought you drew and painted it. Very,
No.
because it's a female doctor and mask and there is a love sign, and also I thought it was very specific to your. Very nice. Looks nice.
Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Paul Bright or Dr. Kandeepan, any one of you can just help me by calling Dr. Suren if he's joining, or will he be late?
Okay, I'll try.
Thank you, sir. So I think I should just start with the housekeeping announcement, like requesting very good evening, one and all. Requesting all the participants to please turn on your video cameras during the session and ask more questions and type more questions in the chat to make the session more interactive. You know, like Nandini ma'am is here with us, and is one of the most experienced faculties in India in palliative care. So please requesting all of you to please utilize madam's time in asking questions and learning a lot from madam. And today's session is on opioid availability, as you all know, which is which plays a major role if we want to set up a palliative care unit. And turn on your video cameras, please mute yourself. And if you are not speaking, please mute. Whenever you want to speak, please unmute, and then you can ask questions. Even in the middle of the session, if you are not able to follow, please, you can always raise your hand and ask question, and you can also type your question in the chat. We'll read the questions for you, and so that the faculty answers them. And I think, ma'am, it's 7:05. Nandini, ma'am, very good evening, and over to you, ma'am.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, sir.
I checked with Dr. Suren. He has been diagnosed with COVID.
Oh.
So he won't be able to join
Sure.
today.
Thanks for letting us know, sir. Thanks a lot. Because I haven't heard from sir, so that's the reason I just asked, because I couldn't reach
He had
sir.
his mother's funeral last week.
Oh, that's so sad. Sure. Thank you, sir. Thanks for letting us know. Nandini, ma'am, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. So good to meet all of you again. And today, Vinila has asked me to talk about opioid availability. And so I have interpreted this topic as how to make opioid available and accessible when and where necessary. Okay, that is how I have interpreted this topic. And also all of you are from Sri Lanka. So I will not be touching much on the regulations which are applicable to India. The person who is going to talk about is Dr. Suren, and I think whenever he takes that session, you will know. But I think my lecture would be a good prelude to understand what Dr. Suren, it would have been great if he was, with us simultaneously. But having said that, hopefully this talk will orient you to understand why knowing these little bit of regulations applicable to Sri Lanka is relevant. Okay, so I have shown this famous picture. It's named, anyone knows the name of this picture? It's a very famous painting. It's named Scream. Okay, so I felt we are talking about excruciating pain, and that's the reason I chose this picture. SCREAM, Scream. Okay, so these drugs, which we call, many of the drugs which are opioids, not many of the drugs, all the opioid drugs which come into the strong opioid group, they are essential medicines. They are recognized as essential medicines in the WHO list of essential medicines because they are essential in acute and emergency care, for example, in surgery, in myocardial infarction, in left ventricular failure, and in the management of moderate to severe pain. Both in the nociceptive pain as well as neuropathic pain. I think you know about the differences between the two. Neuropathic requires specific adjuvants, but the background pain still requires regular analgesics. It's also required in palliative care for intractable symptoms like breathlessness and cough. It's antitussive, and also it regulates the actual subjective experience of breathlessness, and it can bring a lot of relief to the patient. And it is another important use of opioids is in substitution therapy for those who are having substance, they are in substance abuse. They have reached that stage and they want to come back to normalcy. So opioid substitution or agonist therapy is used for them. So they are essential medicines. And now we are talking about its availability, which is contradictory. So something which is so essential and important, why are we talking about its availability? So let's see why. So you can see in this figure, which is actually showing the distributed morphine equivalent opioid, that is the morphine required in milligrams per patient in need of palliative care for that country. Okay, it is estimated as a percentage of need that is met based on the health conditions most associated with pain-related suffering. So you can see that it's a very unequal distribution. You can see the size of North America, the Canada, Australia, and look at the size of Asia, look at the size of Africa and South America. So this is representative of the match between the availability and the actual population. And you can see that India, Sri Lanka are completely shrunk. So there is very, very poor accessibility, whereas it is 3,090 in Canada and 3,150% in USA. In India, it is 4%, and in Sri Lanka, it may be better, as I will show it to you later. So I looked at all countries' consumption of narcotics, this is from WHO data, INCB data, International Narcotics Control Board. So you can see all the so-called developed countries, they are having in the range of 35,000, 15,000. This is the whole range, Europe, Canada, United States. And now we come to Sri Lanka, it is 96. You see the difference, 35,140, and it is 96 in Sri Lanka, and it stands 117th in the world. And India is even worse. It is 145 in the world for levels of consumption of narcotics. We are not talking about illicit consumption here. Today, the entire lecture is on legal use and the actual reason why opioids are grown in the world. Otherwise, if only illicit we are talking about, we should just burn all the fields, right? That is not what we are talking about. Today, the entire conversation that we are having with each other will be on licit use and for the real indicated patients. So you can see there's a gross difference between certain countries and the other countries. Now, this is again estimated requirement in each country, and I've just expanded the Sri Lanka part so that all these drugs are there in Sri Lanka, and all of them are being used in various quantities. And this data is from 2020. This is just to give you an introduction and relevance of why we are having this topic, because on one side, I'm saying they're essential medicines. On the other side, we are seeing how little of it is being consumed by our part of the world. Okay. Now, these are the factors which I have categorized, which are influencing the access and availability of opioids to those patients who need it. Who are the patients who need it? Patients in moderate to severe pain. I don't have to tell you what is that, because you know what is mild, you know what is moderate, you know what is severe. You might have also heard about the WHO ladder, which is slowly changing in character. They are no longer a ladder now. They are more of, you know, an escalator, you can say. So 3 things manage. So as a doctor, and, you know, between the doctor and patient, finally, the patient should have access to analgesics, depending on their type of pain, right? So depending on my attitude, depending on my knowledge and my skills, the patient may have opioid availability and accessibility. So our talk will be focused on, this will be the mother slide on which I will build my topic. So attitudes, you know, we'll just begin with the attitude part of it. Okay. So when we are, sorry, oops. So you just saw that, 1 second, let me just, did you hear anything right now? Any sound you heard?
No, ma'am. It was
Okay.
okay.
Okay, I just thought I started hearing some sound. So are you able to hear any sound now? No, no?
No, ma'am. It's
Okay.
fine.
So there is a term called serious health related suffering, which was, you know, a term that was used by the Lancet Commission, which did a study on all the health related suffering in the world. And they coined this term SHS, serious health related suffering, which is encompassing everything, physical, emotional, spiritual, as well as social. So it is, when it is associated with illness and injury of any kind. This is not something which we are having anyway, even before we had a disease. This is associated with the illness, and it is considered serious when it cannot be relieved without a medical intervention and when it compromises physical, social, emotional functioning. So this is a new term that has come. So what they have found is 75% of the global suffering is due to pain, fatigue, anxiety, and low mood. Now, one question that, you know, we need to remember is, as students, how many times we have had classes on, say, Guillain-Barré syndrome or on mitral stenosis, you know, or things which we hardly see in practice. But how many times we have had patients who, classes or, demonstrations or, discussions on how to manage patients' pain or other things, which really cause serious health related suffering. So today our focus is on pain, and pain is one of the contributors to 75% of the world's suffering. So it's an important thing, and attitude is built on training and what we watch as students. So we don't see much of discussion on managing pain. We are mostly focused on, diagnostics and therapeutics. So we don't see a patient in pain unless it is extremely severe. And you know that chronic pain, they don't even have crying and autonomic responses, and we may miss it. So the attitude towards pain and attitude towards that ethical obligation to manage pain is lacking. Okay. So that is an important aspect we need to remember. And the prevalence of pain in patients with cancer, you can see the same group, this Buchan Everden. He did a study once long ago in 1967 to 2007. He did a study, and then he repeated the same study in 2016. And it's very interesting to notice that he found that he studied this during cancer. And so he found that the percentage that he found in 2007 and 2016, despite so much of advances in pain management, nothing much had changed really. You can see the percentages are really similar. It is one of the primary ends of medicines, but from the patient's point of view. But it is the relief of suffering, is a primary end when the patients come to you. But it doesn't seem to be a primary end when it comes to medical profession. So I'm just building that, the attitudes, how much it affects the recognition of pain, documentation of pain, and addressal of pain. So initially we get very motivated, we try to treat pain, but when the patient has chronic pain, sooner or later, and the patient is saying, I'm having pain, and we don't manage to treat it, we start, initially with deep concern, then we start getting complacent about it, then we will start becoming hostile, and sometimes, because you say this patient has had functional problem, and then we move on. So this is a big issue when we are not able to handle pain. So this unresolved pain is the elephant in the room, and patient's pain which a chronic pain patient may not even express because they are, they don't have the usual appearances of a patient in pain. So all this affects our attitude. And the second part of the attitude is related to looking at opioids. We understand opioids as a drug of abuse, because initially it started off as a trade only to create addicts, because all our regions were utilized for growing, cultivating, and then all the laws also up to 20th century was to eradicate drug abuse, all the narcotic related laws. Only now, towards the last part of 20th century, and now we are looking at opioids as medicines. So this is an important attitudinal issue, because we always worry first, second, and 10 times about opioid addiction, and then we look at it as opioid as a medicine, as an analgesic. So this is another big attitude problem. So this is a study on quality of death, and you can see where India and Sri Lanka are. They are out of 80 countries, India and Sri Lanka is still ahead of us, 65th, and India is happily 67th in the list, because the quality of death also depends on how much the patient had pain relief during their dying period. That was one of the parameters, and many countries went down because of the same reason. Opioid availability is not there. Okay, so now we look at, I hope you have understood there is a huge issue related to looking at recognizing suffering due to pain, recognizing opioid as medicine, and also the idea of quality of life, in the sense we always look at organ-based treatment, disease-based treatment, and very little about the whole person. So the pain is a vital parameter, but from a functional perspective. Nobody will die because of pain, but we monitor pulse, BP, respiration, etc. as vital parameters, and we will make sure that it is in the normal range. But we may not make sure that pain is in the range of 3 and below. We might accept a pain which is 7 and 8 and not look at it as an important vital parameter for quality of life. Okay, so now moving from attitude as an possible issue for opioid availability, now we look at knowledge. The knowledge, this is a study done in 4 regional cancer centers in India. All these centers had palliative care units. And one of the centers which participated in this study was, of course, M&J Cancer Institute. And they studied patients from inpatient ward as well as OPD. And they asked only few questions to the patient. Do you have pain? Because some of them had come for the consultation first time. So all those who had pain in the mild, moderate range and all, they noted it. And they looked at their prescription after they visited the doctors. Okay, so 1,600 patients were studied. And they found that nearly 70% of patients were inadequately treated. So depending on their pain, they were not getting the pain prescriptions. And one very interesting thing was, patients with mild pain were reasonably well treated. And as the pain increased, so when patients were getting moderate and severe pain, you see 94.3% of patients were inadequately getting prescribed opioids. And so the problem came when the patient's pain became severe. So there is a knowledge gap there. So the doctors are comfortable prescribing over-the-counter medications. But when it came to things which are beyond that, there is lack of knowledge, lack of training. Okay, so, and also the knowledge that, see, I'm focusing on cancer because most of my experience is in cancer, but many diseases cause pain. And generally opioids are, without question, they are used for cancer. So many different types of cancer. And some of these cancers, you can see that moderate to severe pain exists in all these yellow colored the ones which I have colored yellow. Nearly 61% of patients or more. This is a study from RCC India. This is a study from abroad. So many cancers have pain, and also some people think it's only in the late stages that the patients have pain. So you can see here, this is only moderate to severe pain. So even in stage 1, almost quarter patients have moderate to severe pain. And sorry, I wanted to show you, yeah. I'm not able to go back, but anyway, I wanted to show you that, in stage 1, 2, 3, and during treatment, everything, there is a reasonably high percentage of patients having moderate to severe pain. So it is not that, early stage patients do not have pain. So, and the third aspect of knowing is knowledge about prescribing strong opioids. So there is a lot of knowledge required here. You must have already learned the pharmacology, dynamics, how to use it. I'm not going into the detail, but you can see that first is recognition of patient, in pain, recognition of, is this pain, the right, is opioid indicated in this pain? That is the next knowledge, that level that is required. After you have reached there, you have to see, is this patient the right patient for considering opioid therapy? Even there are multiple things that we need to consider. Like, is it possible for this patient to access? Is it possible to follow up this patient? How are the systems? What are the other aspects? Is there any history of abuse at home? Is the patient having history of? So we need to evaluate the pain to check whether it is the right pain. We have to evaluate the patient. So this is all knowledge. If there is a gap here, then again the access and availability is affected. If a patient by chance has a drug addiction problem, it is not that they don't have to get opioid. It is just that their monitoring changes. Then we prescribe the opioid therapy correctly. Again, that is a skill and knowledge that is required. And then we have to review a patient on opioid therapy. I'm sure you all have had several classes on this. So, but you see that this is whole knowledge range that is required by a doctor to make the right patient get the right dose and safe and rationally. Okay. And then the patient gets relieved of pain. So opioid availability is dependent on knowledge level of the patient. Also, WHO has given a lot of guidelines. This is the older one. And now they don't particularly talk about ladder, but it is more of a group of drugs. And in the judgment of doctors, we need to choose them. Okay. So now we move on and see what are the other factors which affect. So, so the next thing is about, third thing is about now the skill about, what is the, how do we get, now we have got the right attitude, we have recognized the pain, we empathize with the patient, we want to treat it. So the attitude has been taken care of. We have the knowledge about the drugs, about how to use it and how to monitor, etc. Now we have to abide. There are certain skills required to make sure that the patient gets it. So one thing we need to understand is that all of us, including Sri Lanka, India, we are all signatories to this single convention which happened in 1961. So we are obliged to make sure that whatever we do, this is all about licit use, okay? So we need to ensure the availability of drugs for the medical and scientific use because it is indispensable for relief of pain and suffering. At the same time, we need to prevent diversion and abuse. So this is a balance that, again, it's a skill now we are talking about. So ensuring, so we are not discussing this at a provincial or a country level. We are discussing that we are sitting in the consulting room and how do we ensure that we make drugs available to the patient, at the same time prevent diversion and misuse at our level, okay? So we'll talk a little more about it. So ensuring safe access and availability is one thing that we need to ensure, and which is exactly contradictory to preventing misuse and diversion, because the best way to prevent misuse and diversion is not make it available. So many countries, including India, did that. So, we will produce all this opioid and we will export it to other countries and they will have their patients taken care of. But our patients will die in misery. So well-functioning national drug control system and safe and rational delivery of affordable medicines to patients who need them. Again, selection of the right patient, selection of the right pain. So in a lot of countries, there was an imbalance. The opioid access and availability was hardly in the picture, and preventing opioid misuse and diversion, that was what was pushing the policy, all national policies related to narcotic law. I'm going too fast. Are there any questions at this stage? We talked about attitude, we talked about knowledge, and now we are moving a little further. Are there questions? Because these are all, new aspects, or you all have had several classes on pain and management. Have you all had classes on that? Okay. Any questions at this point?
Any questions?
Did you all get an idea of how it is not just about getting the drug? Suppose I bring, a lot of drugs, strong opioids, morphine, 10 milligrams, sustained release, and etc., and make it available at your pharmacy. Is that going to make sure that the patients get it? Tanujanan.
Yes, ma'am.
You were saying something? I saw you unmute.
No.
Okay. So do you think that stocking this medicine, just, filling up the pharmacy with these drugs, will it make sure that the patients who need this therapy get it?
No, madam, because without proper prescription, no one is going to dispense. So
Yeah.
we have to have a regulation on regarding that.
Correct. So regulation is one thing, but we are just entering into it. But before that, we need to know so much
Yes.
about pain. We need to know so much about medicine, because see, we may all be comfortable using morphine injections, okay, because we have used it for, anesthesia, we have used it in critical care units. The pharmacology of injection is quite different, and the effects of injection is quite different from tablet morphine. So we need to remember that there is a real learning, an extra learning required when we are moving on to using tablet. Another thing is injection is fully monitored. It will be in ICU setting or inpatient setting. And then when we discharge the patient, someone who has managed with a 24-hour drip, if we give them something like over-the-counter medications, it's not going to take care of it. You need to match it with oral medication. And then when suppose a patient is having a cancer pain, he's not going to die of cancer in a week's time. He will live for months and sometimes more than that. So we are managing his pain for months and years. So managing morphine over a long period is a completely different skill as compared to using injection morphine in critically ill patients. So you understand there is a real learning that is required. So that particular, and the attitude, the fact that, oh, this patient should not suffer out of pain. Otherwise, I've heard, some doctors say that, oh, you have cancer, so, pain will be there. And even related, the patient's family also, they think that unfortunately he has cancer, he has to suffer and die. It doesn't have to be that way. We know that it is because of our lack of knowledge that the patient suffers. So that is what I wanted to emphasize on, that availability, because we have done it in India long ago. I think in 1998, the government, after the WHO said that, this is after they have created the WHO ladder, mandated that, the cancer centers should have morphine. So they bought kilos of morphine tablets and they distributed it to the regional cancer centers. And then after 1 or 2 years, it was all lying there and they had to throw it because all of them had expired, because nobody knew whom to use it, when to use it, how to use it. So there is no point making this available. Regulation is only one part of it, but even skills and knowledge is a very important part of it. And through these interactions and through this this course that you're doing with MNJ, you will be competent to use it safely and rationally and not like hold it back for the last minute. Okay, so I'll continue with my class. Yeah. So preventing opioid misuse and diversion has been guiding and directing us so that we close our eyes regarding patients who actually need it. That is what has been happening in many countries, this part of the world, because we have suffered badly during the opioid trade. So we are extra cautious. Okay. So now let us see. So the legal implications, just now doctor was talking about, regulations are important. So the first thing that comes to our mind when we prescribe is, will I, get into trouble? So that fear is there again because of lack of knowledge about what exactly is required. So I'm not entering into what is required in Sri Lanka because there is an expert who is going to speak to you later. All that I'm saying is the fear of regulation should not stop you. The need is to learn that. What is required of me as a doctor when I'm prescribing? How much can I stock in my clinic? How much can be stocked in the pharmacy? What is the method of accessing these drugs into my pharmacy? How do I monitor my patients? So those, if we are doing correctly, the record keeping, the keeping the register, if we maintain all this, there's nobody is going to catch us. So the question, avoiding use of medicine is not the solution. Learning how to use it appropriately as per legalities and as per requirement of the patient is the real skill. So that is why I put it in the skill, knowing the right regulations. Okay. So the licensing procedures in all our countries, I'm talking countries means India and Sri Lanka, because I have done this international fellowship with Wisconsin, and I had 2 colleagues from Sri Lanka, Dr. Suraj Pereira and Dr. Jayaraj from Sri Lanka, and they were working on the Sri Lankan opioid laws and I was working on the Indian opioid laws. So I'm aware of the issues that, they used to really work a lot to correct it. And I'm sure, there are a lot of changes that have happened. So it was so difficult, the licensing procedures for patients to actually get the drug, to, get it stocked into hospitals. It was almost impossible. And these regulations have been modified both in India as well as in Sri Lanka. And now it is much simpler. So depending on what it is in Sri Lanka, you need to learn how to use it. So they have tried to balance it now. The access and availability, misuse, diversion is relatively balanced now. Okay, so there is this body that controls everything, International Narcotics Body, that study of the fat nations, etc., was by this particular body. So this has an account of the entire global opioid production. And then they interact with the National Competent Authority, which is there, I think, in your capital. And then it goes to the actual manufacturers, then distributors, then it reaches pharmacies, and then we prescribe it. So this much has to happen for a country so that we know that there is a stocking in our pharmacy. After that, it is our knowledge, our prescription, etc. And the patients also, they need to think that this particular pain is not something I need to suffer. They need to open out and speak about it. Okay, so, and diversion is something that can happen from hospitals, pharmacies, from the patient's home, etc. And we need to be conscious about it. So we need to do everything possible to avoid. Diversion means from the licit opioids, that whatever we prescribe, by prescription, whatever we give, there can be diversion from the field. We are not concerned about that. There can be diversion from the factories. We are not concerned about it. We are concerned about when we are sitting in the clinic, is everything happening according to what I think is happening in the register? So this, because if anything goes wrong, then the hospital's license will suffer. The morbidity will also increase because someone whom it is not indicated will be having morphine. For example, a teenage son of a cancer patient will be taking the drugs away from the father's prescription. So you need to make sure that you ask these histories when you see the patient. So there are many, we need to avoid this. Okay. So now moving back to talking a little bit about the non-medical opioid use. So balancing risk and safety, we talked about a little. So non-medical opioid use is one thing that really worries doctors, whether should I prescribe or not to prescribe, because there is this fear of adverse effects. First thing we think of is regulatory, addiction. Patient will go into addiction. Shall we prevent it? Shall we, delay it? Another thing is adverse effects. Will the patient be debilitatingly drowsy? Will the patient will become delirious? All these things are because of lack of knowledge. So knowledge will correct that problem of adverse effects, because there are adverse effects due to overdose. There are adverse effects while it is happening. So constipation are things which are worrying during the regular titrated dose. Other thing is overdose death because of respiratory depression. So shall we use it to, do it SOS once in 3 days, etc. So we try to avoid in patients who are fully functional, because they are anyway fully functional. I don't want them to confuse. Then patients who are very sick, oh, he's too sick to give opioid. Patient is too old. Oh, patient is such a child. So we try to avoid prescribing because we are ourselves incompetent. So all this can be overcome when we make ourselves better. We'll talk a little more about addiction. So addiction means these are called aberrant behaviors. Okay, the addiction word is not used. So when there is patient comes back again and again for opioid refill, or they are taking, injecting oral formulations, or when there are unscheduled appointments saying that my dog ate the medicine, or I lost it, or, it got burned, all kinds of, or there is anxiety, insomnia, patient has psychological issues. When there is unnecessary, he goes to Dr. Kandeep and then he goes to Paul, and then both of them he goes and asks for prescriptions. So then he's holding the medicines. There is doctor shopping. So all these are aberrant behaviors and we need to notice them. So this is another knowledge and skill that we need to acquire when we are using opioids, that we should not miss out non-medical opioid use behaviors. So this is the dilemma. Relieving pain is ethical, and there is high prevalence of cancer pain, and there is high level of serious health-related suffering. And pain relief can improve the treatment adherence and also quality of life. That is at one level. The other is non-medical use of opioids, inadequate fragmented training, opioid-related deaths. And the crisis in the USA has seriously, everyone's confidence has been shaken. So I want to emphasize something on that. When we look at the problem that happened in USA, we need to remember that the morphine, I'm just looking at India data because, I did not have Sri Lankan data. So morphine consumption in India is 0.54 milligrams per capita compared to 280 in UK and 680, nearly 700 in USA. And how did they prescribe opioids in USA? It has, primary care physicians used to prescribe opioids, and it used to be given for any kind of pain, because pain relief was considered one of the checklists for their quality of care. So even for chronic non-cancer pain, they were using it, and they were giving it on long term, and the follow-up monitoring was not appropriate. So if we are looking at this particular figure, we can easily make out that they are in a completely different world of opioid use as compared to India and Sri Lanka, where even our patients hardly get access to this medicine. So this was indiscriminate over-prescription, which caused the crisis, and where we are is lack of access for even relieving, severe cancer pain, even in end of life. So in India, 96% of cancer patients in pain have no access to opioid relief. If you remember, 4% have access, 96% do not have. So this is important to notice. And also we need to remember that this particular non-medical use is not only related to the drug. You know that alcohol and everything, all of us have access to it, right? We have access to cigarette, we have access to alcohol, but it is also two things: the property of the drug. Of course, opioids do have an effect on the reward experiences of the patient, and it also affects the natural stress system. It will sort of, relieve it a little bit, whereas individual related factors also exist. There are patients with genetic predispositions who have increased mu receptor density in this particular area, ventral tegmental area, because the reward experiences become highlighted then. And then there are other issues like, their social factors, how the early life has been, have they been, they have received abuse in the family, how is the family environment, disorders of mood, history of psychological trauma. So there are a lot of other individual related factors. So when we are judging a patient, we cannot judge only because opioid is the cause for abuse. There are a lot of patients who take opioids, but many of them don't get addicted to it. So this is an important evaluation. Evaluate the patient when you consider the opioid therapy for a patient. So a young patient, a male, is highly likely to have. Then an older female has the lowest risk. If there are addiction behaviors at home, then there is a high risk. Patients, everyone, alcohol or cigarette. And then there is psychological morbidity, anxiety, depression, unemployed, or drug abuse, history of drug abuse. All these are possible predisposing. So when you take a history, you don't have to take, you have to take the history of pain and the details and establish that it is a nociceptive pain which is responsive to opioid, and this opioid is really indicated here. We also need to take the history for addiction potential for non-medical opioid use. So we need to ask a little more before you start prescribing. That's what I meant by that particular point. Now, predicting persistent opioid misuse and toxicity among cancer survivors was studied. And here they studied that they try to look at the rate of opioid abuse and dependence, okay, and the rate of opioid related admissions. So this study demonstrated that the potential to predict adverse opioid related outcomes among the cancer patients. So they created this online opioid risk assessment tool. So you can also use it. I have used it. So if you press yes, no to all this, you can get one particular outcome, and this is a tool that they have recommended. There are many others. The CAGE aid questionnaire is there. There are some opioid risk assessment questionnaire. So universal precautions for for safe and rational uses: assessing the pain, assess the patient, screen for, do a good clinical history, risk assessment questionnaire, do a proper examination for any comorbidity, evaluate the investigations because you need to adjust for liver, you need to adjust for kidney, etc. Am I going to be able to follow up? Because if I'm not able to follow up this patient, then it is absolutely not ethical to prescribe opioids. You need to make some way of follow up. You all are well connected, 25 districts in Sri Lanka. I think all of you all are in part of the national health team. So you always have a colleague. So when you start a opioid in your center, you need to make sure that wherever this patient goes back to, that particular team is aware of, and then there is a conversation going on, so that there is no sudden change and there is no problem with the patient. Then discuss the medications, discuss the risks and benefit adverse effects with the patient, and educate them on safe use and storage, because it should be in a locked area. It should not be like, I have great relief with pain relief, so you have a headache, you take this medicine, then suddenly the other patient who is not really a cancer patient may really may become very sleepy or maybe delirious, because this is not meant for just ordinary pains. You should also talk to them about the remaining. Suppose a patient gets radiotherapy and the pain goes away, they're supposed to return back the medications. So, and we are supposed to burn it or flush it down. Then set expectations and then manage the pain, and depending on general condition, etc. Screen for non-medical opioid use behavior. Observe the patient. Determine treatment adherence. Are they sticking to the prescription? Are they keeping the pain diary? They're supposed to bring back the the strip, the medication strip, so you can count the pills. And periodical review and support with all their requirements. Then monitor the outcomes, whether it is improving the analgesia, whether it is improving their activity, because ultimately we are giving pain relief not to have a pain score of 0. We are giving pain relief so that they get back to some function. So if they are not getting back into function, we have to review, am I giving the right medications? Should I reduce the dose? And the adverse effects have to be prevented and monitored, and we should avoid the aberrant behavior. So the 5 A's, and also the affect, that is the mood of the patient. These are the 5 A's of managing opioid, and I'm sure you all have learned much more about it. And at every dose adjustment, engage with the patient and discuss risks and benefit. If they say, I would rather have little less pain relief, but I don't mind, but I don't really want constipation more than this, then you have to then accept that. Let the patient have a pain score of 3 or 4, but then they are happy with it. So their pain goal is more important than achieving a pain relief of 0. That is again another nice way of rationalizing your prescription. The amount of relief is decided by the patient based on how much adverse effects they're able to handle. And whenever required, use a specialist referral. It could be a physiotherapy referral so that your opioids can come down. It could be interventional pain management referral when it is indicated, etc. And diligent documentation, because there is register that has to be filled. There are, the different copies of the prescription that has to be maintained. So all these are very important things, that universal precautions. Opioid associated deaths have been studied over study of population over past 10 years. This is a USA based study. And so they studied the de-identified death certificate. They found that deaths from opioid as the primary cause were 10 times less likely to occur in cancer patients. And when it is given for non-cancer patients, it was much, 10 times higher. And the patients who died from cancer, they were different, and they were older, and the median age was 57, whereas non-cancer population, younger patients died. So very clearly, there has been a non-adherence to the prescription, because cancer patients, they stick to the prescription more often, and we see less complication because their monitoring also is done by trained palliative care physicians. That is the difference. If people who are not trained in it start using it, then the complications will be higher and deaths will be higher, because as I told you, tablet morphine is a totally different game compared to injection morphine. So to find a solution to doctor's dilemma, whether to prescribe or not, we need to remember all these aspects that we just discussed. Even in patients who were having drug-related problem, they studied patients of HIV-infected patients, and they found that in the high-risk population for addiction, severe pain is common and aberrant opioid behaviors are prevalent, but not universal. We would have expected that patients who are already addicted, all of them will try to abuse the drug, but that was not found. So we need to remember that it is again individual. So this is a summary slide, again, to remind you that we, from our clinic, our attitude towards pain, our attitude towards opioid as a drug, and our attitude towards giving the best quality of life really impacts the opioid availability. Our knowledge about the pain and which pain will respond to opioid, our knowledge about how to get the opioids into our clinic pharmacies, and also about how to balance the access and misuse affect our prescription. And our skill is to evaluate the patient for non-medical opioid use, balance the risks and safety by doing a good evaluation of comorbidities, their pain goal, and monitoring them, following them up, etc., and ensure safety by doing pill count and the universal precautions, and align with the regulations as applied to your country. Now this is, you can see that prescription issues that are prevalent. This is a little old study, 2013, but just to show you that at that time there was eligibility. Before some doctor can prescribe a medicine in Sri Lanka, there was eligibility criteria. It is there in many countries, but in Sri Lanka also it was there. And this physician prescriber restrictions were not there, whereas in other countries even that was there. Then emergency prescriptions on phone was their restriction. Limited prescription, like you can only give it for 3 days, or you can only prescribe for 1 week. All those things were there in many countries, but in Sri Lanka it was not there. And the pharmacist required to underline, yes, this can be, this is the correct prescription, you can go ahead. That was also required in Sri Lanka. And restricted dispensing sites. It was not available all over, but it was only restricted to very few centers. And negative language in the laws, that is all about addiction, all about illicit, all about something going wrong because you are using narcotics. So that negative language was very high. Okay, so when you prescribe, you need to have you need to have minimum the name of the doctor, the address, the name and address of the patient, what is the daily dose, the total quantity and duration. All this is for safety. And tablet morphine, always it is given along with a stimulant laxative, something for preventing, taking care of nausea, and there is a supporting drug which is from the step 1. This is just to show that. So this is a paper that we wrote together. So you can see Suraj Pereira from Sri Lanka, who also worked towards the change of the law in Sri Lanka. So this is we wrote in the WHO journal, Access to Pain Relief and Essential Opioids in WHO Southeast Asia region. And in this journal, this is the paragraph about Sri Lanka. So morphine is available in all 25 districts now. Okay, this was published very recently, 2 years ago, at teaching hospitals, provincial general hospitals, as well as district general hospitals, base hospitals. And from an annual morphine equivalent consumption of 0 in 1988, the gradual improvement has been very modest but significant to 1.21 milligrams per capita in 2015. This may be attributed to multiple efforts at different levels, and pain management clinics at the National Hospital of Sri Lanka and National Cancer Institute, Maharagama, have established dedicated pain management clinics. So this is a great change from what it was a few decades ago. And I'm sure today in 2021, this must be, see, all of you are doing this course, which means that, it's great benefits. The benefit of all this is going to be experienced by the patients of Sri Lanka. So why do we, as we talked earlier, finally, all our pain management is for eventual outcomes. So suppose a patient is on cancer treatment, when you manage the pain, it improves the therapeutic relationship. It allows the patient to it allows the. Is there a question, Dr. Verni Bala? So it causes poor adherence to treatment, and it worsens the treatment outcomes. It also lowers the survival. Okay, poorly controlled cancer pain. So I've shown you the references here, and this presentation is available with Vanilla for you to see it again if you wish to. And also the treatment experience is improved. The impact on daily activities, social roles. They're able to teach if they are a teacher. They're able to cook if they are a mother. If they are able to go to office, or they are able to, do gardening if they are, whatever they are interested in. So that is important while you're struggling with your disease. And patients, one third of the patients say that the pain was intolerable. So implications of well-controlled pain is, of course, all this gets improved. Intensity of pain modulates the health-related quality of life, and it becomes clinically relevant improvement in the quality of life. Okay, so these are the beautiful poppy flowers. Okay, so I just want to show how pretty this plant is. And so this is my take on opioid availability. I have not looked into the legal aspect because there was a specific person who is going to speak about it later. If you have questions, we have 10 minutes.
There is
So-
one question in the chat, ma'am.
Okay.
Asked by Dr. Shobika. How about the usage of opioids in pediatrics?
So are they going to have a full class on it? I'm sure. Because
It's a
my class was not on using opioids pharmacologically. My talk was about availability. So if I'm saying 90, in India, I'm saying 96% of patients who require opioid don't get it. When I come to children, how much it is? 99% of children who need opioid don't get it. 1% of the child, because all our fears get even more amplified when it comes to a child. So your question is, I think, more specific to no, I can't see that question. Can you read that question again?
Sorry, ma'am. I think she sent a direct message. Sorry, I'm
Okay.
posting it again. How about the usage of opioids in
Yeah.
pediatrics?
So regarding opioid availability, my answer stands. But if you're asking about whether it can be used, definitely, of course, and Gayatri can give you a 10-hour lecture on it, because she is passionate about relieving pain in patients or children who are suffering pain. So there is no step 2 in treating cancer pain or severe pain in children. We go straight from step 1 to step 3. So you can see the WHO guidelines on pediatric pain management, and they have elaborated on it. So Vinila, you must be having the document, or it's a totally different topic. It's about pain management. Availability wise, it is worse than adults. And we already saw how bad it is for general population.
Yeah, ma'am, if
Anything
you can
else?
share with me, it'll be nice.
How many of you actually have used opioid on, say, every week to someone? Can you just press on raise hand and let me know? Do you all use opioid at all? Okay, Dr. Kandeepan has used. So you see cancer patient, Dr. Kandeepan? Can you unmute?
Yes, madam. Yes.
Okay. So you have now become more comfortable to use after these lectures?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So that's nice to know. So you have different formulations, which are immediate release, sustained release, everything?
Yes, we have. Both.
So could you just
Immediate.
tell, just because, it will be completing today's talk, what are the rules that you need to follow in your clinic? Just what you follow, if you can let others know, because you are anyway following the rules of Sri Lanka.
No, we are prescribing in the hospital. So actually, I don't know about the law and how to use in the private sector.
No, but
the
in your
hospital,
center, how many prescriptions you need to make? 1 or 3?
It's depend upon the number of patients who's attending the clinic.
No.
According to
For
the-
one patient, how many prescriptions you need to give?
For opioids.
Yeah. Do you
Yeah,
need to
opioids.
keep a copy for the hospital and one for the patient and one for the chemist? Is something like
No,
that?
only there's only a drug card, one drug card. We
Okay.
are prescribing in that drug card. The dispenser is giving the drugs and keeping the drug card with them.
So this
for
is
the
a
next
physical
clinic, for
drug
the
card, or is
next-
it computerized?
No, physical drug card.
Okay,
Physical.
okay. So there is no copy kept with you, another copy with the pharmacist and another copy with the patient?
No, the one card is there. When the patient is coming to the clinic, they are getting the drug card with the clinic file. After
Okay.
we are prescribing the file and the drug card, the drug card go to the pharmacy and they will keep that. And next clinic visit, they will enter that drugs in their books, that countable one, uncountable that one. After that, they are giving that drug card to the file, the
And
clinic file.
patient?
Then they will keeping that.
And
getting
patient
the
doesn't
drugs
have a
only.
record of that?
No, the patient doesn't have the record of that.
So how
Only
will
the,
they know how to
pumps.
use it, when to use it? And
No,
all?
they will write and give. They will write and give there's a paper or some folders. They are writing in that folders and they are giving the patient how to use it.
That is not called prescription, but.
That is actually we are prescribing in the drug card,
Okay.
but not giving the patient. That is keeping in our purposes.
Okay. So in
For our
India,
record.
suppose I am staying in Mumbai and I have to go to Hyderabad. Okay. So, and I'm using morphine, for example, to carry my medicine, suppose I'm going there for 1 month, I'll have to carry good amount of medicines, no, because I have to take 6 tablets in a day, or if it is SR, 2 tablets, I will need to carry my prescription, because if someone catches me in the airport with my drugs without a prescription, I am in trouble, because I need to prove that I have authority to carry that medicine. So I don't know what the rules are, because I don't want to get into it because it may be different in Sri Lanka, but the patient also requires a prescription to justify carrying that medicine while traveling or some reason. And the doctor here, if they are not, there is something called RMI training. They just recognize medical institutions to stock. You all may not have that problem because it is a national system, and all of you may be automatically deemed recognized. But here we need to have that competency training. Otherwise, we are allowed to stock, but very minimal quantities, just enough for emergency use, like 20 tablets or 2 patches of fentanyl, or some 5 ampules of morphine as regular practitioners. Otherwise, we need to have our own requirements. So nobody can just carry. I cannot, suppose I can, as palliative care physician, I'll say, but I need to have training certificate. Suppose in my bag they find about 100 tablets, I am in trouble, because so these are the few things we need to remember. We need to have a license to hold it as a doctor, and the patient also requires a prescription to justify that they are taking prescribed medications. Okay. Any other?
I think Dr. Shobika has written the same thing. Sorry, I think she sent me direct message again, ma'am. So madam has written, it's actually when a clinic book where everything is written, she says.
When?
Dr. Shobika says, actually the patient is given a clinic book where everything is written.
Okay, so they carry a record of the prescription with them. That is correct. Otherwise, how will they justify?
One of the clinical drug card and other records are available in clinic book.
Okay, so that is carried by the patient. Okay. So that is how they can demonstrate. Very nice. Any other question on my topic today about opioid availability? Do you see an attitude problem amongst Sri Lankan medical professionals and nurses? Like nurses will say, try not to take that medicine. Do you want your father to get addicted? That kind of thing happens in Sri Lanka. Are the doctors discouraging other doctors or the patient's relatives not to take it? What have you seen?
Actually, the team here is not in a palliative care.
Okay. So you all are going to get into it now. So you can share experience later.
So we have, yeah.
Okay. So these are all, we are telling because we initially when we start, like for me 20 years ago, when I used to prescribe opioid, I have had specialists who tear my prescription because they'll say, what is this? You should not be taking opioid. Your father is still walking around. Why do you want him to be bedridden? So, because of lack of knowledge and attitude, but things have changed over the last 20 years. So we have seen this, and that is the reason I asked you. But I'm sure 1 year later, when you all are yourself using this, you will see that the patient comes walking, he will drive the car, he will go to the office. There are, of course, monitoring periods. Each time we start morphine, there is a monitoring period where they cannot use heavy machinery. But after that, when the dose is stabilized and the pain relief is stable, they can drive, they can do everything that other people do. They can do normal activity.
Yeah, even here in Hyderabad and at our institute, we still see some of the the oncologists within the hospitals. It's like, it's so sad. Like when we see either they strike off our page where we have written morphine, or they write stop morphine. Mm-hmm. And like in case if the child has died due to some other reason or the patient had died, they say that the patient has died because of morphine.
Yes, so, that's common. Yeah. So, morphine is like water. it can be, it can give life if taken in the right quantity and at the right time, and you can drown in it, right? It can be a cause of your death also when there is too much water. So if paracetamol can be used, that paracetamol overdose can lead to liver failure. So same way, it is like any other drug. There are receptors in our body, and we need to remember that when those receptors, when they don't have once they start getting filled, when you stop the drug, there will be some response. So suppose you use beta blocker and suddenly you stop beta blocker, patient is going to have a hypertension, isn't it? So same way, opioids attached to the opioid receptors, and when they take off, when you stop suddenly, they will have a physical response. That doesn't mean the patient is addicted. It just means that the receptors got used to it. Psychological addiction is what is important. Whether the person has craving, the cage questionnaire, no? And it is a eye opener, like you have to see it. First thing you will want is the opioid, and then there is, use despite harm. So these are the qualities you need to look for. So avoiding looking at those potential addict patients is important. And then even if they have genuine pain, there is a way of using it and there's a way of monitoring it. But knowing all this is important for us so that we can competently take care of the patient's pain, because that is the only responsibility we have. And it is an ethical responsibility. So if there are no questions, Vanilla, we can close it here.
Yes, ma'am. So any other questions, or shall we just wind up this class?
So I may not see all of you again. All the very best wishes. And
No, madam, I'll take your time and we'll call you again for the case discussions, if you're free. Sorry. Yes.
So anyway, whatever you learn in palliative care, whether you see cancer patients or not, the way you interact with patients are going to change, and even the way you interact with the family is going to change, because we are going to be better listeners. We are going to understand. For everything you will say, okay, why are you taking leave tomorrow? Then you will say physical, emotional, social, and psychological, spiritual reasons for taking leave tomorrow. So we are going to be all the time talking about these 4 levels. For everything you will think that way. So all the best, and have fun learning and have a great life.
Thanks a lot,
And
ma'am.
if anybody of you is celebrating Eid, today is Eid, the holiday here. So I'm happily at home.
Thank you very much, madam, for wonderful lecture.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you soon.
Yes, thank you. Bye.
So I have shared the feedback link in the chat box, requesting all of you to please kindly fill up using that link. And next session will be on 28th July, which is on spirituality. And one more session which we have missed, either we'll be doing palliative care emergencies or death and dying. So we'll see you on 28th July, Wednesday at 7 p.m. Thank you so much. And please do not forget to share your feedback.